The 70s began with Richard Nixon as President of the United States. Along with Secretary of State Henry Kissinger, they formed a policy called Realpolitik. The first priority of this policy was national interest over moral and ethical concerns. During Nixon's presidency, there was a rise in inflation and unemployment known as stagflation. To combat this, Nixon put temporary freezes on wages, prices, and rents. Another issue during his presidency was the cost of foreign oil. The U.S. was dependent on oil, and the Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries quadrupled their prices, causing an energy crisis. Nixon tried to lessen this dependence by making a pipeline from Alaska, but the cost was still high. There were organizations formed that had a positive effect on the United States, such as the Environment Protection Agency and the Clean Air Act, which helped to conserve the environment. The first Earth Day was held on April 22, 1970, and encouraged people to preserve their surroundings. Although these were all positive things that came from his presidency, Nixon is more remembered for the scandals that occurred. People from Nixon's committee were caught breaking and entering into the Democratic National Committee at the Watergate office complex, and it was revealed that the president was paying them for information. Nixon was going to be impeached, but he resigned, making Gerald Ford the new president of the United States. Ford's number one goal was to combat the high inflation that still plagued the country. He also tried to get $722 million to aid South Vietnam and Cambodia after the war, but was denied.
In the election of 1976, Jimmy Carter was elected president. He had an open administration, meaning that he was going to be honest and earn the country's trust after the scandals that took place with Nixon. During his presidency, unemployment declined while inflation increased after his corporate tax cuts. Carter lost popularity when he tried to pass control of the Panama Canal back to Panama. U.S. citizens disapproved of this at first, but it was eventually passed. Another event that took place was the Iran hostage crisis. This was a diplomatic crisis between the U.S. and Iran, in which 66 Americans were taken captive when Iranian militants seized the U.S. embassy in Tehran. They were not released until after Carter's presidency. The 70s were a time of many civil rights movements. Women, Native Americans, Latin Americans, and the disabled were some of the minority groups that fought for their rights. One thing that did not change in the 70s was the population growth. The U.S. had 0% population growth and a rising divorce rate. The rate nearly doubled from 1970 to 1975. The 1970s are remembered more for the cultural aspects of the time period. Some of the fashion of the 70s crossed over from the 60s hippies in the form of bell-bottoms and platform shoes. Disco became a new popular form of music. Some popular names in music were artists such as Pink Floyd and Led Zeppelin. Many movies and television shows that are still enjoyed today first made their appearance in 1970s. The Brady Bunch, Jaws, and Star Wars were among the favorites. Overall, the 1970s were not necessarily a time of economic or political prosperity, but much of the culture is still reminisced today.